We know now President Donald Trump and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein are meeting on Thursday. It's possible Rosenstein could resign then, or he could be fired. When or if either possibility happens, though, the big question will be what happens next. And the answer to that is complicated. Here to help me understand the complexities, Neil Katyal, former acting Solicitor General under President Obama. All right, Neil, it is complicated. What happens if Rosenstein is either fired or resigns?
Well, a lot of bad things can happen. I think Rosenstein, who's the acting attorney general, is basically the most important person in the world when it comes to the Mueller investigation. The special counsel regulations, which I had the privilege of drafting in 1999, put Rosenstein in the driver's seat, supervising all aspects of the prosecution, from who to indict, who to, even subpoena. All sorts of decisions are made ultimately by Rosenstein. So if Rosenstein goes, then, you could be replacing him with someone who is the president's lackey, and the president is fond of doing that in all sorts of other areas, which is one reason he has been so critical of Rosenstein. And when we wrote the regulations in 1999, we understood presidents were going to do bad things at various times. We thought about Nixon, who was kind of an amateur level wrongdoer, but Trump has taken this pro. He's gone pro on this, and that's the real concern, that you can have someone come in as acting attorney general and really stymie or even try and end the Mueller investigation.
And the reason they're considered acting attorney general for the purposes of this is that the actual attorney general, Jeff Sessions, is recused from the inquiry. Correct. So they would be sort of functioning in their stead, right?
Correct.
Now, so here's my question. My understanding now is that if he's fired, then it just goes to the next person in the Department of Justice line of succession, which is Nolan Francisco, who has your old job as Solicitor General. Is that right?
That's correct. And Noel is a very, very bright lawyer. He's an appellate lawyer like Ken Starr. He's not a prosecutor. And I think it's fair to say he's been a particularly partisan Solicitor General. I think overruling past Solicitors General in the office more than I think all of his predecessors combined who are alive. So it's a pretty, worrisome thing.
Right. So, and here's an op-ed from him in October 5th, 2016, just a month before the election, where he says the FBI has treated Clinton with kid gloves, writing that in the Wall Street Journal opinion page. Investigators went after Governor Bob McDonnell with every tool they had. The double standard is obvious. Give you a little taste of his perspective.
Right. And I was going to say, Rosenstein did the right thing by nominating Mueller for this position, which is, Mueller was a Republican, well respected by both sides of the aisle, FBI director by a Republican president and the like. Noel Francisco, who is a, great, bright lawyer, doesn't come from that pedigree.
Now, that's if he's fired, right? So my understanding is if he goes in Thursday and the president says you're fired, what controls then is the Department of Justice line of succession and in the absence of someone newly confirmed to the post. However, if Rosenstein resigns, the president under the Vacancy Reform Act can put in anyone who's already been confirmed by the Senate into Rosenstein's job. Is that right?
Well, there's a whole big debate about that, about a double acting prohibition and so on. But whenever there is a debate, the Trump administration just decides to short circuit it and just do essentially the wrong thing. So, I'm not optimistic about what would happen in that scenario. But look, I think the most important thing, Rod Rosenstein has protected the Mueller investigation, let it go forth. And you've seen plea after plea, indictment after indictment, the president's national security advisor pleading guilty to felonies and all sorts of things. None of that would have happened were it not for Rod Rosenstein.
All right, Neil Katyal, thank you for joining me.
Thank you.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.